if somebody comes and there's no information, I'd work with the nurses to get more information. Or if the person wants to talk about reproductive issues, I might think it's a lot better for our nurse to visit the person at home and talk about them.
Fellow Homo sapiens, my name is Torie Robinson and welcome back to Epilepsy Sparks Insights. If you're new and you haven't done so already, please do like and comment on this episode and subscribe to our channel to support our mission to decrease the discrimination faced by and improve the quality of life of those affected by the epilepsies, and also get everybody appreciating and excited about the amazing epilepsy research that is out there. So this week we have part 2 with the star neuropsychiatrist Mike Kerr. Mike is going to share with us recommendations for clinicians who are unfamiliar with intellectual disability and epilepsy, tips for effective care, and always keeping in mind the quality of life of the people affected.
Well, Torie, it's great to be here again to have a chat with you about epilepsy, which I can obviously talk for a long time about. So I'm Mike Kerr. I've worked in epilepsy for over the last 25 years as a specialist in epilepsy, and over the years I've become specifically focusing on adults with an intellectual disability and complex epilepsy, as well as working on various research projects over many years, often with colleagues around the world.
Do you have any recommendations for people who, say clinicians who aren't familiar or confident necessarily with communicating with people with intellectual disability and epilepsy?
What is, I think they're probably a lot better than they think they are. And they just believe that it can be done. When actually really, a lot of the time, it can't be done any more than what the person can't speak. You can't, you're probably not going to be able to probably change that unless it's a thing could be helped with the communication advice. I think that, the main thing is that what we know from people, quite rightly, if people don't like it, they're completely able to communicate and they come into a room and the doctor talks to someone else.
Oh, that is so rude and disrespectful. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But the person, I'm somebody who doesn't, tends to give people a chance. So I think sometimes some people just don't quite get it, or sometimes in some situations the carer might be very dominant and it might be very hard to get a word in elsewhere apart from that carer. But obviously start off, and I've seen 10,000 consultations of people with disability, and I generally don't know how to do it. So I just try and just try and get what I can, and then ask the person, do you know how this works? What's the best thing I can do? What does so-and-so like? Or what can we do outside? And I'll be very lucky to work with, where I work in Powys Health Authority, with fantastic nurses who will often know the person as well, and will be another angle in, because doctors, I think, are a bit daunting, and professors are very daunting, and so they can't. Some of them are not daunted at all. They just tease me, but some of them are definitely daunted, and so you have to use other people to help that. And I suppose it's one of these not knowing things again, but recognize what you're not, what not having that communication means to your decision making. Mm-hmm. So there's some information pieces you won't have, and you're going to have to work with other people. But what does that mean? Can I work with those people? Have they got the right to give this information in terms of the Mental Capacity Act, in terms of the families? Are they any good? When did they first meet the person? So you have to work out how you use what you've got. But don't be upset, I think, that you can't communicate, because that's common. It's just as long as you've set up with an empathic attempt to communicate as well as you can. Some people are really brilliant and just have a fantastic personality and can cajole people along. But it is a lot of people. There's a lot of non-communication in medical offices, isn't there? So it isn't just in epilepsy or with disabled people.
Indeed. It's the way you are physically, eye contact or lack of eye contact, tone, everything, patience. And actually that's another interesting thing, isn't it? And this affects everybody, affects clinicians, patients, families. The limited time you have often with these people affected. And I would wonder, is it, important to realise that you have to sometimes slowly build a relationship with the individual and sometimes their family?
Yeah, well, you have to slowly, and it can be quite a difficult thing if it's a particularly intense situation, because often you'll meet in an intense situation when things are at their worst. So you have to of course build relationships. What our fantastic paediatric colleagues do, they build very, very strong relationships, with people over time. I mean, you can't not build a relationship. It's transference, counterfeit transference. You're dealing with that intense emotions with people. But I think it's a big thing, and I fully understand how I'm quite lucky as I work in a setting that's quite kind to me in the time I get, and with a community team who are fantastic, who support. But I worked in the epilepsy unit, which was also fantastic, but I would be seeing people probably, every 10 minutes. And you had to prioritize which bit you would get out of that consultation. And that was before you had to speak for an hour about sodium valproate to everybody who's on sodium valproate, and before you had to talk about other things, and you could just about get through it. So those structural impacts on people. And so what our colleagues do is they try and use bits of their team everywhere. So they'll use the nurse will do one bit, and they'll try and make the best out of the time they have to get to the same endpoint, which is somebody who actually is taking part in something they know what they're taking part in. So learning disability, intellectual disability, it is a barrier, but it isn't a barrier that should stop you having treatment. And that's its biggest danger, is a barrier that stops people. And I think sometimes professionals find it hard because of the complex sort of legal framework of people's consenting or not, and that makes them not sure how far you can go forward of doing something. And they're not on purpose, it just takes a lot of time. It'd take an hour to do something, which that'd be 4 patients in clinic probably or something.
And how do you make time for that then? Do you and many other people have to literally go into your own time for this?
I make time by having a longer time for my appointments.
Okay. So, but not all hospitals grant.
Definitely, they won't all grant that, and it's very poor efficiency by the hospitals to do that, because you're going to save lots of other appointments in the future by having the time to sort things out. And a lot of professionals just use all their experience to try and cut things out and get to the core of the matter as quickly as they can, and be as safely as they can, and then we'll work with their broader team. So if somebody comes and there's no information, I'd work with the nurses to get more information. Or if the person wants to talk about reproductive issues, I might think it's a lot better for our nurse to visit the person at home and talk about them than in a setting with everybody around, parents around, and all that sort of thing. So you can do it. You just have to, I think you said early on, you have to cut into little bits. You can't all do it in one go. It might be several consultations before you get to know. Good, useful IT systems would be helpful when they exist.
They would be fabulous, wouldn't they? Especially if they could connect between departments, let alone trusts. Could you imagine?
Yeah. Well, they can be fantastic, but it's very rare. Usually, it's just another barrier too. And of course, if people have intellectual disability, the history is very important, because there's a far higher chance of having had a complicated life in childhood with the paediatric services with an epilepsy than it is with general adult services. By
complicated, what do you mean?
I mean, being very ill children with lots of tests and lots of different drugs tried and hospitalization, and then that doesn't look like the person who's in front of you when they're 18, who might have had a very good last 6 or 7 years. But that information is actually quite important, very, very important from the beginning. So families will be incredible for that. Mothers, grannies will be amazing.
Even siblings, I bet, sometimes, if you can get them involved.
Definitely siblings. They're going to be more challenged by working probably and stuff as well. And, but no, definitely siblings. They'll be taking on the mantle for some people.
But I can imagine as a sibling, sometimes, how siblings can communicate in ways that sometimes it's not really cool to communicate with your mum and dad, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes I would imagine they could have something to contribute, or sometimes, different members of the family might not feel comfortable talking about certain things.
Definitely, yeah. Yes, and also in adulthood, a lot of people will be in care providers. So families will still be usually involved, but not living with the family. So sometimes, it's used. So that'll also be an important dynamic. But I think in the end, you can go an awful long way and you can make a lot of decisions, and it shouldn't be a problem. Communication is just inevitable. And we've got a lot of, exciting new treatments which we have to try and deliver to people. And that is the difficulty when you've got barriers.
By new treatments, do you have a couple in mind you could share with us?
Just to say that, the new drugs that are existing, the drugs, for specific epilepsy syndromes.
Okay.
So, the syndromal nature thing, I'm sure you've had people talk about and talk very brilliantly about specific, extremely interesting genetic syndromes and this sort of thing. And then on the sort of coalface, the challenge is to, is to get somebody set up to be able to get the best success out of such an intervention. Or maybe not even able to be, if you're in a very small area, you might not even be able to access the medication. You might have to refer to someone else to access the medication. So it's trying to keep that pathway going. But a lot of these people will also, who need, say with Lennox-Gastaut or Dravet, those sorts of conditions, will also have a lot of comorbidity. So they will need the learning disability service in the UK, to help with supporting access to healthcare and to support with psychology and all the other things. So it's often a bit of the same, they need a more complicated epilepsy, but it's on the background of a more complicated health system.
There's things like digestion, I think people don't talk about enough. Huge contribution to people's lives, isn't it? And even seizure frequency sometimes, as well as mood.
I think a lot of people who've been quite ill for quite a long time with epilepsy and intellectual disability, people will be looking for lots of little small gains and probably not necessarily expecting a massive success with one treatment, although that obviously can happen even after many years of poor success. But you'll often be, and one of those little gains is in the person's general health, and that is things like their bowels or their their physical fitness and the quality of their life experience. And you can never say for sure that's going to change your epilepsy, but it certainly improve your life. So there's nothing wrong for going for it. And you will be looking at little gains. And sometimes those little gains, might just push you into a much better bit of your life. So we work very, very hard on rescue medication plans. We don't have many people on them because it's not remotely always needed, but a very, very good rescue midazolam plan can get you staff team feeling safe enough to bring you outside a lot more. And you can suddenly have a massive change in life because you are seeing the environment and you're going out. So it looks like it's just in case you get status or some very complicated reaction to your seizures, but it can open up doors.
Literally.
Literally opened up doors. And I've certainly got people who were indoors for a long time until they could feel safe going out. And particularly when, the whole change to midazolam happened. So if you had your fit in supermarket, not that there's that many around in Mid Wales, but if you had a supermarket, you'd be able to have someone to look after you.
So much of what you've said applies to people who have epilepsy, other conditions, but don't have intellectual disability too. I think this is good advice for people all round, really.
Yeah. There's very little that's fundamentally different apart from the communication, which can be difficult and can be difficult in anybody sometimes. And I suppose just the higher preponderance and prevalence of rare epilepsies, because they associate with intellectual disability and they associate with chronic ill health. So, and that is a very, that's a very expanding world and great for families because, the people are focusing on these people who are not always the focus of their most interest, in terms of service provision or interventions.
Thanks again to Mike for inspiring us to improve the lives of people with an epilepsy, intellectual disability, and often much more, which can even have a ripple effect and improve the lives of families/caregivers as well. Check out more about Mike and his work on the website torierobinson.com, where you can also access the podcast, the video and the transcription of this whole episode all in one place. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to the channel and share this episode with your friends, colleagues, family members, universities, schools, the person down the corner shop, anywhere, because this supports our mission to decrease the discrimination faced by and improve the quality of life of people affected by the epilepsies around the world, and also get everybody appreciating the incredibly cool epilepsy research out there. See you next week.